see.
G'day everybody, welcome to Inconceivable's Diversity Panel. My name is Annie McCann. I am from Sydney, Australia. I am the founder of a network of readers based in Sydney that was established in 2009 called Readers Review. It gives me great pleasure to introduce three wonderful humans who I'm very privileged to say are really dear friends of mine. Today we're presenting Diversity in Infinite Worlds, and we're going to talk about diversity, the importance of diversity, inclusion and representation in the realms of pop culture, film, books, comic books, graphic novels, you name it. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge our country, which is the traditional custodians of our land, past, present and future, and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, in which we're hosting our Zoom panel today. Very exciting to be here. So first up, I would like to introduce the panel to you guys. In alphabetical order by first name, I'd like to introduce you to Ali Gill.
Hi.
Hi, Ali. Welcome. Ali is a Latina blogger, and she loves books, manga, and graphic novels. She also is a Dungeons and Dragons enthusiast, and she's very big on promoting indie and BIPOC voices in the reading landscape. And she has started an amazing sticker and enamel pin business known as Simply Ali T. One of her pins is right here. Welcome, Ali. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Annie.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Next on the panel is Maisie Dixon. Hi, Maisie.
Hi.
Maisie identifies as she, her. She's a grey ace content creator and storyteller from regional Australia. She writes short stories, one of which is called The Goddess Worth, and it's featured on The Elephant Ladder. She's also started an amazing candle business called Candle Smith Co., one of which I have here today called Hag's Kitchen. Welcome, Maisie. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
And last but not least, a friend of mine, Tobias Madden. Welcome, Tobias. Hello.
Hi.
Tobias is also based in Sydney, Australia. He's a writer and editor from Sydney, actually editing his debut anthology called Underdog Short Stories. But he's also the author of a debut novel coming out, being published by Penguin Australia in 2021, called Anything But Fine. And very excitingly, it's also being published in America by Page Street YA. Tobias is a very passionate member of Love Oz YA and the LGBTQ+ communities. And he also works as a digital marketing executive and YA publicist in Bloomsbury Publishing. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure to be here. So what I'd like to do is start off with each of you to tell us what you believe diversity is to you, your connection to diversity, and how close it is to your heart. So maybe Ali, if we could start with you.
Oh, okay. Sure. So diversity for me is being able to see myself or see people on the page that you usually don't see. Like as a Latina, I've only started to see myself on media and pages and comic books recently. And even then, I still don't fully see myself because even though I'm Latina, people forget that Latin America is actually this huge place with many different countries, and people tend to put this label that Latina means you're either Cuban or Mexican, but I'm neither. I'm Venezuelan. So one day I'll find a Venezuelan story, and if it's not, I'll write one.
Yes.
And the first time I truly saw myself on media was actually with Moana. Moana is a Polynesian tale made by Disney about a girl who has to rescue the ocean, essentially. And the thing about Moana is that she was the first brown, thick girl with curly hair I ever saw on the screen. And that was that night that I saw Moana, I stopped ironing my hair, and that's why now I have curly hair.
And it suits you so well. So please keep the curls.
And it's like that tiny little thing that matters to me.
Yes. Like no, you're 100%. Yes. Maisie, what's diversity to you and your connection with diversity?
I am disabled. I use a walker. I use a variety of medical aids to get around. So diversity to me means various people with varying things seeing themselves represented, whether it be page, screen, or song. When I first read A Cursor, Duck and Lonely by Bridget Camera, and I saw a girl with unilateral cerebral palsy who was badass and had thick curly hair and was just so badass, I literally wept when she declared that she had cerebral palsy and that she had surgery to fix it, because that has been my experience. And so it's a very powerful thing to see you represented in media when you have had no representation or had to find minimal representation before.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Maisie. Tobias, diversity to you.
Um, I guess diversity is reality. We live in this big, beautiful, diverse world with so many communities and so many identities. And, in media, for us to portray anything other than that kind of just, it would be doing a disservice to the world we live in, I think, because there's so much beauty in diversity and we can learn so much from each other that I think that, we really need to do everything we can to uphold that and to promote that and to celebrate that.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. I'm Muslim. I'm Indonesian Australian, born and raised in Western Sydney. So growing up Indonesian and Australian, I'm multicultural, or CALD, culturally linguistically diverse. So personally for me, I've had a good experience growing up in a multicultural and diverse world. I feel I've had the best of both worlds. But I guess in recent years, Muslims haven't really exactly had the best rap in media for things that we haven't done, just putting it out there. But for me, it was quite important for me to have inclusion and diversity, because we're all different, but at the end of the day, we're all the same. And we're all people. We just want to get on with our lives and just coexist harmoniously. And just, on that with representation and why it was important for me is to see myself in a positive light. So there has been representation of Muslims out there, but not so positive. So seeing that turnaround has been very touching for me, which I'll get into a little bit later in terms of different areas I've seen it turn around. So it's very, very close to my heart, and to grow up in diversity, I think it's a beautiful thing. Like what Tobias was saying, it's real, it's out there. And I find turning those differences into something positive, great things can happen, which is, one of the things that is happening right now, having a chat to you guys. It's a great thing. So I'd like to go into, I guess, the importance of representation, which we have touched on a little bit already. Maisie, you brought up a fantastic book that I've read too. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why that was so important to see?
So for me, growing up, I never really saw people with disabilities on like page or screen or anything. And if it was a person in a wheelchair, and it was never like anything else, it was always a wheelchair. Growing up, seeing that it wasn't really focused on the person itself, it was more focused on how people with no disabilities could properly treat that person. So seeing characters like Maria Lewis's Casabon Clipsing, who has only one arm, but she still gets around, to seeing Harper in A Curse of Dark and Lonely, these two characters do not let the disabilities define them, and they are treated normally like anyone else. And that was a huge step for me to see representation where my focus wasn't my disability, it's me as a person, and that is incredibly powerful.
It is. That's very true. Tobias, if we could have a chat to you about, diverse representation, inclusivity in work that you have seen. Again, how important it is to you to see, I guess, someone that you identify in books and pop culture and the like?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And, I work with young adult fiction, and that's what I write as well. So I feel like particularly for teenagers, to be able to see yourself on the page is, it's kind of everything. And I grew up in a country town where there was very few, if not basically no sort of gay role models for me. And so, if I had have had that kind of thing there on the page, I think that would have been incredibly helpful in sort of coming to terms with my own sexuality and with coming out and feeling safe and, all of that sort of thing. And so I think it's incredible now that there's, particularly with queer fiction in YA, there's a lot. And I think that, teenagers are so lucky to have that now, covering that whole spectrum as well, because, queer is so many different things, and there are so many brilliant queer authors out there. And I think that, we're getting to a point where all teenagers will have a book to turn to and to, hold dear, and that really helps them come to terms with their own identity. And I guess, that's kind of what it's all about.
Yeah, fantastic. And again, I agree with that as well. There's been such a profound shift in particularly YA literature, where there's more diversity and inclusion now. And I had never seen that before. I would say probably the last decade, or maybe even the last 5 years that I've seen that. So that's very true. Ali, I wanted to go back to Moana and, that Disney film that you mentioned. That was your turning point, really. So I just want to have a bit of a chat to you about, how that meant to you and how important that was to you. And maybe the impact that would have, because that's obviously for the younger audience, the cartoon. So yeah, can you tell us about that a little bit?
Well, people think that cartoons are always for kids, but from the cartoonists that I know, they say, nah, we write for the adults as well, because who's taking the kids to the movies and watching TV with them? The adults.
Yeah, I think we're all fluent in Disney here. Is that right? Yeah, go ahead.
So with Moana, like, people think it's strange to identify with her because I'm obviously not Polynesian at all in any shape or form. But she was just, like I said, like a strong brown girl who wasn't like, she wasn't suffering. Her story wasn't about struggle or pain or migration or how they're poor. It was, you know, essentially a princess who was going to rescue the world, and she looked like me, and that just changed my life. I don't know, when did the movie come out? Like, I was 20, maybe 19. I don't know. It's been a while. And I went to see the movie with my dad, and I told my mom about the movie, and I showed her, look at her. And she's like, oh my gosh, she looks so much like you. She even has a big nose. And I'm like, did you tell me I have a big nose? And she's like, no, I didn't mean it like that. But like, you know, she looks, you know, non-white, pretty thin Disney princess that we're all used to. She was different, and she looks like so many people out there. And even though I'm not Polynesian, I still I see myself in her, because that type of female exists everywhere.
Yes, I 100%. And I have to say, the first diverse Disney film that I had ever seen was Aladdin growing up, and it was like the only non-white female character that I've ever seen. And then that was followed by Mulan, and then that was followed by Lilo and Stitch, and then Moana. So there hasn't been a lot out there, I have to say, but it is changing, which I guess brings me to the next point, because I've been reading a lot of articles about the change and the shift in terms of, you know, having more diversity, representation and inclusivity in spaces like pop culture, film and books. So I wanted to have a chat to the three of you about how we feel that if there has been a change, have we come a long way? Is there still a lot of work to do? Maisie, I'd like to start with you on this one. How do you feel about, I guess, the change at this point?
I feel that we have sort of come a long way, but I do feel that we've got a lot to go, because representation, whether it's queer representation or whether it's disability representation, there are a whole spectrum of identities and different ways that people are disabled and or are queer. So for me, I just have noticed a shift from most specials being about how to treat disabled people, as opposed to here's a story about a disabled character. So that shift, I think, is really important, because we are now seeing what people with disabilities or disabled people have always been, people. Like, we're not just a wheelchair or a cane or a glasses, like we are a person. So in that sense, there has been a really big shift, but there's still a lot more that I think needs to be done for representation for everyone.
And I think representation should tell the happy story as well, because a lot of the representation we see is the struggle. Oh, it sucks because this, and they struggle and they cry, and it's the sadness, and they have to overcome their sadness. Like, that's great and it's important, but we need the happy story. We need the Harper who is disabled, but she's also a princess and can use a sword and stand up for herself. Her story isn't about her disability, but her being in this world and trying to get home.
I like to think that I do write, because I am a writer for The Elephant Letter, and most of my protagonists are disabled people, but they're people first. And so I crave that representation. So I started writing people like me. We want the happy stories. Not every story about a disabled main character needs to be about the struggle, or not every disabled character is upset that they are disabled. And I think that's a difference that needs to be more, stories need to cater more towards that, because we are happy people. We just have something that we need to work around. It's not a big life upsetting thing.
Exactly.
For most of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't exactly define us. It's how we identify, but it doesn't define us as a whole person. And that's 100% exactly right what you're saying there. Understood. Tobias, you work in writing, so I'd love to bring you in on this conversation as well. How do you feel that we've come in terms of diverse representation in books or even in film?
Yeah, I think like everyone has said, you know, we've come a long way and we have a long way to go. You know, as I mentioned before, when I was growing up, I can't really even think of any books that I read that had gay characters in them. There were, you know, a few movies and stuff like that, but as Maisie mentioned, like a lot of those stories for queer people, you know, 10, 20 years ago were generally more to do with the trauma of growing up like that, of living your life, you know, as a queer person or as a gay man, you know, for me, as what I identify. And so I think, you know, in one sense, we have a lot more queer stories now, which is amazing, and in general for all, you know, all identities, I think. But I think we are moving away from that trauma as well, and just celebrating people for people. You know, I do think though, some of those stories are still valid, you know, particularly with queer fiction. Coming out is such a big thing for a lot of queer people, and maybe one day it won't be, but at the moment it still is something that, you know, kids have to encounter. So I think that, you know, those stories are still valid, but, you know, not every story about a gay teenager or a queer teenager needs to be about coming out, because for some people it's a really lovely experience, and their struggles in life come from other, you know, other things. But I think having all of that is what, you know, makes it a really well-rounded representation of any kind of identity.
Yeah, perfect. And Ali, you've written essays and you've studied the shift in diversity and what's been happening. So I would like to bring you in on this in terms of the change and the profound shift with diversity. Can you share some of what you've seen in your research?
Yeah, so I recently completed a master's degree in digital communications, and whenever I got assignments, I always made sure to like gear my assignment towards something that interested me, and that was diversity and inclusion. And I always wrote about inclusion in movies and books. And there's actually a chart by what's the company called? By
It's all good.
I don't know who it was. Oh, the Cooperative Children's Book Center, School of Education of University of Wisconsin, Madison, and they did a check of all the books published in the year 2015. And in the 2015, in all the children's book published, 73% were white, then 12% was animals, trucks, and inanimate objects, and then 7% was African Americans and Africans, then 3% was Asian Pacifics, then 2% were Latinx, and then 0.9% was First Nations people in like around the world. And then in 2018, they did the research again, and they saw that there was actually a decrease of white stories. So they went down to 50%, and then animals went up actually to 27%, and then African Americans and Africans went up 10%, Asian Pacifics went up 7% in representation in all children's novels published in 2018, and then Latinx people went up 5%, and First Nation peoples went 1%. And it's great that they went up, but it's still like you add up all the people of color, and they're still less than animals, like animal stories for children, and that's just doesn't feel right, you know?
Yeah. Why do you guys think that is? Like, is it because they're not getting published and they're not getting the support or the promotion that they deserve, or is it just because they're not writing at this stage and they don't feel supported? Anybody can take this one.
I mean, I think it could be for so many reasons, but I do remember seeing a recent study from America as well, and I can't remember the exact statistics, and I don't want to misquote the study, but it was a look into the publishing industry itself rather than the writers and the books, and the results were pretty astounding. Like the amount of Black or African American editors working in publishing houses in America was, you know, very, very slim compared to white editors. And so, you know, I think that's probably a part of it, in that we need to diversify that whole industry. It's not just about the writers and their work, it's about every level up through those companies, that the whole thing needs to shift. And I think a lot of publishers have realized that and are you know, trying to employ new strategies that really do encourage people from diverse backgrounds to apply for jobs. You know, there was a lot of talk about unpaid internships, and because that's, you know, often the way into publishing, but, you know, an unpaid internship is not manageable for a lot of people, because people have to work and they have to make money. So I think, you know, publishers, we're moving away from that kind of system and, you know, doing everything they can to encourage people from diverse backgrounds to apply, because obviously, you know, the stories that we're all drawn to are so different. It's so subjective, and one great way to promote diverse authors is to have a diverse publishing team.
Yeah, and not just publishing too. And most like powerful media producers, the people in charge are white cis male, and what like they promote what they are and what they do and what they see. And when they do bring this diverse show or diverse media, they tend not to promote it at all, and you forget that it exists, and then they flops and they're like, oh, see, it didn't work. It can't work. And like a perfect example for that was when Netflix came out with like their first original like series was Sense8, and it was like, the most diverse show at the time, you know. They had queer characters, Latin characters. It was so good, and they had people from all around the world. And they canceled it, saying it was too expensive. No one was watching it. It was like the biggest lie ever because everyone was watching it, and like everyone went to Twitter and started complaining. And instead of bringing it back, they made a film to like close the like loose ends. But even then, like, and the same thing happened with another Netflix show, One Day at a Time, which was a remake of a 90s show of a Cuban American family, and Netflix dropped it saying no one watched it. And I'm like, stop lying. And thankfully got picked up again by another network. And the same thing happened with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, another really diverse comedy show got dropped. And people went into social media and were like, what are you doing? And like Lin-Manuel Miranda also came in, and lots of really big celebrities used their voice to bring back the show, and it got picked up by another network.
Yeah, see, I feel the same about Grimm, which is my absolute favorite TV show ever, which I like to pitch as the Brothers Grimm meets Criminal Minds and SVU. And that was probably the most diverse TV show I had actually seen. And after 6th season, it got axed. But I don't know why. They keep saying the ratings were low, but there is a huge movement out on social media petitioning for it to come in, or to have a spin-off series at least to bring it back, because you know they had culturally diverse characters, and even the legends that they were sharing on the show was very diverse. So it is actually sad to see that, you know, the ones that have been embraced by the world have been dropped by directors and promos. But like what Tobias has said before, and even Maisie was saying before, that I think that yes, whilst there is still a lot of work to be done, there has been a shift in diverse representation, which is probably the segue to the next thing I'd like to discuss, which is own voices. And one thing I wanted to discuss is Penguin Random House last year ran their first inaugural Write It Fellowship program, which I was very excited to have been a winner of. Very excited. Thank you. I won that. What that program was doing, Penguin were looking for own voices. So they were looking for people who had never been published, who had never written before, but want to write an own voice story. And so they were specifically looking at different areas. And I came from the angle of CALD, which is culturally and linguistically diverse. And at the moment, I'm writing my first middle grade urban fantasy, which is about a young girl who, like myself, is Indonesian Australian, but it stems from her Indonesian history, which is quite well known in Indonesia. And the reason I felt that I should do this is because it's never been done. And growing up in Australia, I have not once seen an Indonesian story on the shelf, and it's only been in recent years I've seen more Muslim authors coming out of the woodwork, you know, publishing stories that are not of struggles of being a Muslim in a Western world, but more, you know, they then become the superhero or a protagonist. And I guess that is the response to, I guess, what we've experienced in the world and what we've seen on media. But own voices is something that is relatively new, I'd say, in the last few years that's come out. But I'd like to discuss about the concept of own voices and how we feel when somebody else is writing or representing us as a culture, or how we identify. So maybe Tobias, I'll bring you back into this one as well, because you're a writer, and I like bringing Tobias into this because he's a writer. But the book that you're writing does feature an Indonesian Muslim character, and it's written by a non-Indonesian person. I was absolutely flattered that you wanted to include that. So tell us about the process of, you know, representing another voice that's not yourself.
Yeah, I mean, obviously own voices stories are so important in all media. And I think, you know, it's also important to acknowledge though that, one own voices story will never be able to represent everyone's experience of that particular identity as well. So I feel like, you know, that's one sort of caveat to that, but it is so great to read all of these stories that are really authentic, for that protagonist and their experience. But, you know, in the sense of my own work, you know, my protagonist is a white cis gay guy like me. So in that sense, it's very own voices. But I think, you know, we as writers all need to work really hard to diversify our entire cast of characters, and try and represent, you know, the world as we see it. And so one of the other main characters in my book came about largely from conversations, Annie, that you and I had about your experience. And so I was just really sort of touched by some of your stories, and really intrigued by your journey and your experience. And so, you know, we sat down and had some really great chats about what that's like, because obviously if I was going to include, you know, a Muslim Indonesian Australian character, I wanted to know as much about that as I can. So, you know, I think, you know, I did as much research as I could, and read lots of great books by other Muslim authors and stuff, just to sort of see what that experience is like in a number of different iterations, I guess, because, you know, as we know, it's never going to be the same for everyone. But, you know, the most powerful tool for me in writing that character was talking to you, because, you know, that's your lived experience.
Yeah.
And I could never represent it as well as you could. But I think, you know, being able to include a character like that, you know, was really, really exciting and really wonderful for me, because that's, you know, you're a great friend of mine. And I think it's really cool that, you know, that I can add that into my book. And, you know, I remember there were so many times when I'd be writing something and I would message you on Facebook just to be like, does this sound okay? Like, is this
correct?
Is this still authentic?
Yes.
Yeah, because, you know, I really wanted to get it right. And there's so many more steps to take, you know, from this point, because my book doesn't come out for, you know, almost a year. So we'll be sending it to a bunch of sensitivity readers, and to get, you know, as many opinions as we can to make sure that it is as authentic as possible. And there are a number of different characters as well, from different backgrounds in the book, that we want to, you know, really make sure that we're doing them justice, and that people will be able to see themselves on the page.
Which is fantastic. And I can't thank you enough for that, because I do understand that there are those in the community that do take issue with, you know, a non-Muslim writing or a non-LGBTQIA person writing that character. But personally for me, and feel free to disagree with me on this, but personally for me, I feel that, you know, if the person has done fact checking and they've gone through sensitivity reading and they've, you know, contacted the appropriate people to get that information correct, it shows empathy. It shows that somebody is out there who is genuinely interested in who I am and how I identify as. And I feel, you know, that these people are trying to, you know, include us in a world that never really represented us before. And I think, yeah, Maisie, I'd like to bring you in on this as well, because I remember exactly how you felt when Bridget Kemmerer wrote A Curse of Dark and Lonely.
So Bridget Kemmerer does not have cerebral palsy. When I read the thing and she read like the author note saying that she didn't have it, what I was floored by, which I really shouldn't have been, is that she actually went to like medical professionals and doctors and tried to understand that experience. And I think speaks to the fact that, you know, people are doing this research to try and get it right, because if you don't live with a disability, you can't quite comprehend the nuances and everything. But the fact that she went so far as to get all this stuff right, and the profound effect it had on not only me, but I know other people with cerebral palsy who's reacted positively to it, is really good. And even in my own writing, I have a few friends who I will run past my stories with disabled characters and be like, is this okay? Am I doing right by you? And 9 times out of like every time they're like, yeah, you're doing great. You just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. And Ali, I think you were onto something. If we don't see any books that are published by a Venezuelan author, I think you need to get onto that, because I think
I'm at 50,000 words. I'm almost there, guys.
Because there are great stories to come from. Is it Latinx? Is that what it's called? Latinx stories? Yeah. Because I've read one in the time that I've been reading, one book, which you're going to talk about later on as well. But we've spoken a lot about writing and books, but I'd like to move a little bit to, I guess, you know, the pop culture realm and film and movies. And, you know, like I said before, growing up, the first diverse cartoon I saw was Aladdin, and then that had shifted in the Disney world. But just recently, like, my favorite is Black Panther. Like, my absolute favorite movie is Black Panther. And that was the first time I had ever seen a Black superhero. on screen. So I guess, you know, can we talk about some of the films that we've seen that has shown, you know, included and diverse representation? Anyone can think of others?
Yes.
And yes,
I actually want to bring up like one of the first, I think, diverse shows that ever came out in Western culture as a cartoon was Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yes.
And it's one of the best cartoons in our lifetime. I will argue if you disagree. And like the best thing about the show is that it's culturally one of the most diverse shows. It came out in like early 2000s. It was a complete Asian cast. There was powerful women who were based on samurais. There was one of the leading characters was a blind girl who's like her blindness had nothing to do with her other than she just happens to be blind, but she's also the most powerful bender in the whole country, like in the whole world.
Yeah.
And there was even disabled characters, like I don't know if you remember Teal. He was and he like went to the Eastern temples when Aang wanted to go, and they were all there, and he invented how to fly with his wheelchair. That was like amazing. And people love this show, but they forget that the show was written by a bunch of white people. And like sometimes something that scares me sometimes about the label of own voices is the gatekeeping, because it says only people of this voice can write this.
Yeah.
But that's so wrong, because we have Avatar: The Last Airbender, the best show in the world. It was written by white people, but they did their research. This is what goes back to Macy was saying, like proper research to get things right. And that's so important. Like we shouldn't be gatekeeping who can tell what stories and what type of character you should write, as long as you do it correctly.
Yes, 100%. Maisie, yeah.
I also want to jump in and take a look at the comics angle side of things, because I think the first superhero that I ever saw, and this is way back in my teenage years, was Oracle, Barbara Gordon, after what happened to her. And she was in a wheelchair, but she ran the Birds of Prey. She was quintessential to so many stories. And to see a strong female character in like a medical aid essentially was really fantastic. And now we've got like General Amaya from the Dragon Prince, who is deaf, and she leads an army, and she is so badass and does not let her disability define her. So characters like Oracle, Toph, the Jin, the guy in the left, just everything leads up to profoundly experiences for people on watching it, I think.
Cool. That's so cool. Very exciting. I have to get onto these things. Like I haven't really got into the whole.
Please do.
Yes. And I'm very scared to, you know, dive into these things because it might take me away from my reading time. Grimm did that. It took me away from my reading time as well. So I haven't dived in. But what I'm sensing from talking to all of you is that there has been a profound shift in looking at diversity as people are different, to accepting that, yes, we're different, but turning those differences into something quite positive and looking at it with normality. And that is the shift. Is that what you think the shift has been in the last years? Is just looking at us as just normality and, you know, celebrating who we are and bringing that as a normal thing? Is that what you think has happened?
Yeah, definitely. And like even in sci-fi, the Star Trek Discovery, like the whole cast is essentially diverse, but the story's never been about them being diverse. They just happen to be like a queer medicine man, or like creating this like magical spores that make the ship go forward, or, you know, just all these weird things. And never once has their story been, oh, like I'm Black, like damn, whatever. It's like I want to get to the point that our stories aren't defined by who we are, but by our actions.
Yes.
And we're slowly getting there. Like a perfect example is Star Trek Discovery. Most diverse cast in science fiction, I believe, and never once has the story been about their struggle or their identity. It's always been about, I screwed up, now there's actions to my consequences. Oh boy.
Yeah, which is normal, yes. So let's have a look at, I guess, the first time that we saw diverse representation, or a particular shift, like the first time we saw it. So Tobias, what's the first thing, if you can think of, like either not necessarily seeing yourself, but the first shift in diversity representation that you've seen either in media or in books in recent years or before? If you can think of it.
Gosh, I don't really know. I'm thinking back to my childhood and my teen years, and you know, I think for me, and in terms of gay representation, you know, I think a while ago there was only a couple of different versions of the sort of, you know, cis gay male identities that were represented. And that would be people like Jack from Will and Grace.
I love him.
Or otherwise, wonderful character. Or otherwise kind of shows that really represented the very promiscuous kind of side of gay culture, which you know is a part of it. But there are so many different kinds of gay people, just like with every identity. And I think that for me, that's one, you know, big thing that I've noticed, you know, a big shift in is that we're portraying people as multifaceted and multidimensional, and, you know, that there's more to them than just being, you know, like jazz hands, like Jack on Will and Grace, or, you know, that kind of thing. Like there is more to everyone than that stereotypical kind of cliched thing. And, you know, I think cliches have their place in stories because they can be really powerful, and tropes and all that sort of thing. I think they're all really powerful, but yeah, that's one big thing for me. And I think, yeah, you know, we're just seeing so much more in general of all forms, and it's just really, really great. And like, you know, like we've said, we're all big Disney fans, and I think, you know, Disney's doing some really great stuff to diversify their films, and you know, even all the short films on Disney Plus and stuff like that. Like there's some really beautiful stuff out there, and so it's great to see, because, you know, the earlier kids are when they see themselves represented, then the better, you know. So starting with something like Disney, I think, can be really, really powerful. And even like Ali said, like it doesn't even necessarily have to be your exact identity, but even just someone who looks like you, or who is a strong female as opposed to a damsel in distress, like all of that sort of stuff is just so powerful for a kid. And I think we underestimate that sometimes.
100%. I wanted to jump in there because I've mentioned this, you know, talking to you over the years and over the last couple of months as well. I've noticed that, you know, growing up as a Muslim, I noticed that watching film, the villain was always an Arab. It was the terrorist was always an Arab. It was always a man with a beard, and he'd, you know, respond to the name Abdul or Ali or something. It was always that stereotypical look. But I've seen in recent years that in film or in pop culture that it has shifted from being the villain to being a superhero, and not just superhero, but a female superhero, which is Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, my absolute favorite. We all love her. I found out about Kamala Khan after I watched Black Panther, because like I said, Black Panther was the first time I had ever seen, you know, a person of color who was the superhero, and the connection with the African culture and all that, it was amazing. It was phenomenal. And the way they did that film, that's why it's one of my favorites. But then I learned about Kamala Khan, and yes, I went out and grabbed the first volume of the anthology, of course. And whilst I'm not Pakistani, and whilst I don't, you know, identify as the same culture, what I loved about Ms. Marvel is it goes out and it basically explains to the world, no, we're not villains. We can be heroes, but we might not, you know, have a cape, so to speak, or we might not shoot power out of our hands or anything like that. But, you know, we do hold, you know, the well-being of others close to our heart as well, and we want to help other people. So that was the messaging that Ms. Marvel was giving, and that was like that profound shift for me to first finally see someone who identified as a Muslim and female who wasn't a villain. In fact, it was a superhero. So I just wanted to, I was mesmerized, and that's why she's one of my favorite characters, so much so that I even have her pop Funkos right here. Yes, I had to immortalize her some way. So Ali, like I said, like you said before, you mentioned Moana was the first time that you saw someone that you identified with. But in terms of diversity in media, what was the first shift that you identified?
For me, it would have to be in books. I think it was when Rick Riordan came out with his second half of the Percy Jackson series of Heroes of Olympus.
Maisie and I know that one well.
And he introduced Leo Valdez, and he's a Hispanic character. And I think that was the first time I saw like Hispanidad in a book that wasn't about like sadness and immigration and losing your home and all these terrible things. He was like the son of a god I can't pronounce, and asbestos or whatever. And he was so cool. Like his story wasn't about his struggle. His story was just like, I am a hero and I have to help save the world because our parents suck. And it was just, I think I was my first year of uni when that book came out. And I screamed and I went to all my friends. And I'm like, "Do you know that Percy Jackson now has like a Hispanic character?" Because I always visioned Percy as brown as well, because he's described as like tan skin. So in my head, he looks.
Well, he's part Greek, isn't he?
Yeah,
he's part Greek. Yeah. So
I always envisioned him at my skin color, but like he was never like, he was Greek and I'm not Greek, so whatever. But then like Leo Valdez came and I was like, oh, life has changed. And when was it? Like 2013, so like 7 years, almost a decade.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Since then, I've been seeing more, happier, like Hispanic stories.
Yeah. Maisie, profound shift in diversity. What did you see?
So I talk about, I run a YouTube. So on this YouTube, I talk about the cake theory, which is you see crumbs, but then you'll get the whole cake when someone serves you up like a piece of representation you've been craving. So when I was post-surgery, the first representation I saw was Full Metal Alchemist. It was a young person with a robotic arm, a robotic leg, but he wasn't sad about it per se, and he was traumatized, but he wasn't like complaining all the time that this is what he was. He was out there going on the journey looking for the Philosopher's Stone or something. And to see a character who's just living with different limbs or like some sort of disability was really profoundly impactful for me. So that was the first time I saw the shift. And then my favorite representation I got before Bridget Kemmer's brilliant Harper was Maria Lewis's Supernatural series, where she wrote Caspar von Klitzing, and that character was one that I craved and I wanted, and to see myself represented in the new adult genre was so profoundly impactful. So that's kind of the times that I saw the shift happening.
Fantastic. Oh, it's really cool. Well, let's talk about some recommendations, because we've been talking about how important diversity is and what it meant to us when we've seen it, the first time we've seen it. Let's talk about our favorites. So, Maisie, you mentioned, do you have the book cover with you so we can see?
Yeah, I've got them right here.
I was going to say, let's do some show and tell.
Can I say
yes, Ali.
A side comment? Maisie, did you know that they added a class for disability in Dungeons of Dragons?
I have nerdy confession here. I am actually doubling into Dungeons and Dragons just a little bit. I am getting into it, and I didn't know there was a class for disabled like characters, but I do on another video platform play a disabled wizard sorcerer character just for fun. So yeah, I'm very excited to delve into that realm.
I think we're going to have a D&D afternoon, people.
But like it's those little things like in popular media that just make all the difference.
It does. It really does. Yeah, I remember before I started seeing protagonists that identified as Indonesian or Muslim, seeing them as a supporting character was very exciting, or seeing a Muslim author come out was very exciting. But yes, it's the little things that really stick to you. You're right, 100%. Yes, Maisie, let's do some show and tell. What have you got?
So this is my very lovely art copy of A Curse of Dark and Lonely.
Thank you, Bloomsbury.
Thank you, Bloomsbury, so much for sending this to me. It is a treasure of mine. I hug it at night, and I sleep with it for the first couple of weeks, because it was just the first time that I saw myself completely in a book. But before this came out, I love Maria Lewis so much. Like, she's one of my biggest inspirations. And this cover is just like the most gorgeous thing. Is The Witch Who's Courted Death. It's about a bisexual disabled medium who goes looking for the murderers of her brother. And it was just the first time I saw people treating Caspar normally, like just as Caspar.
Yeah, I love Caspar.
I also kind of self-promo recommend my own work on the Elephant Ladder. My story, A Goddess's Work, is about a disabled goddess who treats the prayers of people who are lost, forgotten, or just outcasted by society, and how it's her story and how she came to be revered by the people of the land, basically. Right. And lastly, this anthology, The Secret Loves of Geek Girls, has everything from disability to queer representation to different race representation. It's great. It's like one of my things that I love rereading, because it's so good.
It's beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much, Maisie. Tobias, recommendations. What's your favorite? Oh, before you do that, I'm just going to give another shout out to your book, Underdog, which he edited. Now, was this last year? I can't remember. Last year?
Last year, I know. It
I
feels
know.
like
Where's
about
the time
5 years
gone?
ago.
My goodness. And this too, like the short stories have diverse stories in there too, some of their own voice and very diverse as well. So it was fantastic read. So once again, I had the pleasure of emceeing this and I got a personal copy with it. So thank you so much for that one. Yes. Shout out, Underdog.
Thanks, Eddie.
Tobias,
It's a
you're
lovely
right.
book.
Hey,
I've read a lot of it. It's really great.
Oh, it's great.
oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to highlight a couple of other Australian anthologies while we're on the theme. So one of them is Meet Me at the Intersection, which is edited by Rebecca Lim and Amberlyn Quay Moana. So this one is all about, it's young adult, and it's all about intersectional identities. So it covers a whole bunch of different things, including queer, disabled, First Nations and Aboriginal, people of colour, so many different, like there are just so many different identities represented in here. Some of them are kind of more essay type things, others are fictional. It's a really, really brilliant read. And the other one is the Kindred Anthology, which is edited by Michael Earp, who's also one of the authors who appears in Underdog. So this one is just a bunch of really, really wonderful queer stories. There's 12 in here. And again, some great intersectional identities in this one. And what I love about both of these is that, you know, with anthologies, you can find your new favorite author. You know, if you love one story, you might, you know, not like some, you might love some, but that's the joy of an anthology. I think there's always something for everyone. And because you get to read so many people's work, then you can, you know, do a quick Google, find what their novels are. And if you connected with, you know, their particular identity or their story, then you can go and find more from them. So that's why I think, you know, the anthologies can be really great. So make sure you check these two out.
That is so cool. Thank you. And Tobias, if I could just ask you, just in case those who are watching don't really understand what intersectional means, could you just explain to us a little bit about what that is? Yeah.
Yeah. So the intersectional identity, I guess, is just when someone identifies as a part of 2 or 3 or however many marginalized communities. So that might be a queer disabled person or a queer First Nations person, that sort of thing. So it's all about when those different identities intersect, which is what makes them intersectional. And, you know, I think a lot of people would identify as that in some way. Like I don't, you know, nothing is generally one or the other. And I think, you know, everything is a spectrum. And so I feel like a lot of people would connect with those kind of particular stories.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for that. And thanks for the recommendations. Ali, your Rex. Let's do some show and tell.
Right. So I have The Gods of Jade and Shadow, and it's written by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And it's a story of a girl who frees the god of death by mistake. And she has to help. he has to, and it's the Aztec god of death. And he pretty much takes her on. He's like, help me reclaim my throne. And it's in the 1920s Mexico, and you enter this world and you meet the Aztec gods. And it's a really nice story because it's like a Mexican story, but it has nothing to do with her suffering. It's just, damn, I freed a god, now I have to help this god, or else because my life is tied to his life, and he dies, I die, and I don't want to die. So it's pretty fun.
And then, I like how she just goes, I don't want to die. That's pretty fun.
And then I have 2 books from the Rick Riordan Presents. If you really want to get into diversity, his imprint is all about, you know, diversity. This is Sal and Gabi Break the Universe, and it's about two siblings who break the universe and they have to fix it. It's really cute. It's middle grade. All Rick Riordan imprints are middle grades. Yeah. And then the one I just started is Paola Santiago and the River of Tears, and it has to do with La Llorona. Yeah. And Paola has La Llorona. La Llorona folklore, and Paola has to rescue her friend because she got caught by La Llorona. And I need to read that book. It came out like 3 weeks ago, so I'm super excited.
That's Simon the Schuster, I think. That's published.
No, I think it was Hatchet. Actually.
Hachette, okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
Latina representation always makes me happy. So yeah.
Yes. And I think there's more and more coming up. No, I have to talk about La Llorona as well because I've got a book here. Yes, I do have it. So speaking of Maria Lewis, after A Witch Who Caught a Death, she released this book called The Wailing Woman.
Yes, yes, one of my favorites. Oh my God.
This one's about a banshee, so that stems from Irish folklore. But I actually had mistaken that particular book to be representing the story of La Llorona, which is is it a Latinx story? Ellie, is that how it's called?
Right.
Yeah, and it's a horror story about a woman who drowns her 3 children when she finds out that her husband's had an affair with a younger woman. But then every Halloween she goes out to kidnap 2 boys and a girl to drown them in order to try and get her kids back. And that actually featured in my favorite TV show, Grimm, which was a perfect segue to my recommendation. That's one of my favorite stories. And I think they made a movie about it called The Weeping Woman.
Yeah,
Came out last year.
Is
It
that
was
a
a horror
Netflix movie?
Isn't it with Emma Stone or something?
I think so. I haven't seen it yet, but I've been wanting to see it. And I think I don't want to go alone to watch that movie. But yes, some recs that I'd like to share. So I harp on about this TV show, which Maisie has called an underground movement. It's called Grimm. So this is the first season. It's 6 seasons long. And like I said, I pitch it as, Brothers Grimm meets Criminal Minds meets SVU. So Nick Burkhardt is descended from a long line of Grimms, and he has been gifted or cursed, whatever you like to call it, with the ability to see the Wesen within people. So people can actually transform into actual monsters, which is their true identity. In other words, he can see the big bad wolf, or he can see the monster that we read about in fairy tales. It's a very diverse cast. So, you've got Grimm, who is, he's descended from the German ancestry, as is his unlikely friend Monroe, who is German. He knows everything about it. And his partner's Hank, so he's a black African American there. And there's also like a Filipino sergeant, and the captain is Israeli born, but in this particular show he plays Latino, and he speaks about like 10 languages. He's very linguistically diverse. And I think that's one of the things I love so much about this show, aside from the fact that it has the legends and the supernatural elements and entertainment. It's how diverse the culturally diverse the cast was. It was something that meant a lot to me to see that on screen. And even like right at the end of the last grand final episode, they had thank you for the fans in all different languages. Oh. And the one that made me scream so loud in my living room at 10:30 at night was Hatur Nuhun, which isn't Indonesian. It was West Javanese dialect, which was my dialect as well. So I was like, Mom, come. So I remember that. That was really cool. So that's one of my favorites. That I highly recommend. And also like the legends that they talk about in Grimm, they're not just Brothers Grimm. They do tap into, La Llorona was one, the Aswang, which is a Filipino horror tale. Does anyone know about the Aswang? So, it's a terrifying tale. So there are different versions of it, but in this particular one, it's about a creature that comes out at night and basically attacks pregnant women. And with its long tongue that makes a ticking sound, she can go into the womb and take the amniotic fluid from her wound, and that gives her immortality or a longer life. And you're like,
so
stop,
gross!
stop.
Please stop!
Stop, please.
That hasn't really sold it to me, to be honest.
No, yeah. But everything else is fantastic. You have to watch it. I've mentioned a lot before about Kamala Khan, which is one of my favorites, and I believe there. Maisie, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a Netflix series coming out about Kamala Khan, or was it a game?
So as I am a big Kamala Khan fan, and he introduced me to Kamala Khan. I've read the second run of the comic book, so it's called The Magnificent Miss Marvel. So what Ames got is the first one, and then there was a second one, which is also written by, I think, a Muslim writer.
Yeah.
Yes. Ahmed. Yeah. So basically, Marvel has released a game with Miss Marvel as the main character, and I saw clips of it. I shared clips of it with Annie, and it's fantastic. They talk about her costume. They talk about like elements of her life. And yes, there is plans for a Disney Plus TV series to feature the Magnificent Miss Marvel, and the lead has been announced. There's been pictures about it. There's been hype about it. And personally, I'm really hyped because she is one of my favorite superheroes because she's just so endearing and reminds me of Annie, and it's the best thing.
Yeah, I have a T-shirt of Kamala Khan where she's actually holding a big stack of books, and I'm just like, yeah, is that why she reminds you of me?
Well, it's just the way that she's portrayed as like this kind, caring person, and it was my first introduction to like obviously the culture and the customs surrounding it.
Yeah, it's very
and
cool.
Talking about our favourite TV shows, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the BBC's Musketeers, which has a really diverse cast of the Musketeers themselves, and it was just like the first show where it's set in like 1419 or like that sort of era, but it was just really fantastic to see a different cast instead of an all-white cast, and the stories be like really fun and the action be incredible, and the leather suits are like it's just guys in leather fighting crimes in like Parisian France. You can't get any better than that.
I was gonna say, how could you knock that? You couldn't knock that.
It's got strong female characters. It's got funny moments. There are nods to other media. It's just great. It's just great all around.
I've got a lot of TV I have to catch up on here, guys. I appreciate the recs. Another book I wanted to just bring to everyone's attention is called The Gauntlet by Karuna Riazi. So this is a middle grade adventure, which is a Jumanji retelling. So we all love and know Jumanji from 1995, and then of course the remake. However, this particular book it's got a diverse cast of characters in this particular book, all around about 12 to 13 years old, but they find an old-fashioned board game that was told not to be touched, and it looks elegant, but of course they touch it, and as a result they get sucked into the gauntlet. But the way it's set up though, it's not a jungle, it's the Arabian desert, and it goes to like the Middle East, so it's very different to what I read before. So this is one of my favorites, and she does have a second book coming out. For the life of me I forgot the name, but it's like a space sort of feel to it. So that's the second book that's coming out. And the one that I hold so close to my heart is We Have the Flame.
Yes, I heard about that via you. I've got a copy sitting somewhere.
Yeah, I bought a copy because Annie was like, "You need to read this," and I'm like, "Okay."
Yes, I think I'd like bombarded everybody with this. Yeah, Tobias, read it.
The group chats were just like, "Buy this, please." We were like,
yes.
Okay.
For me, the reason I loved this book so much is because the inspiration behind this magical world was inspired by ancient Arabia. And I've never seen it before. And I've listened to Hafsa Faisal talk on panels before, and she mentioned how initially in her head when she was writing this story, she was envisioning a map like Lord of the Rings. That was sort of like the inspiration behind it. Lord of the Rings, it was, forests, very European looking. She's also an artist and a designer as well. Actually, she sent me this candle, which is the Sands of Arawiya. She actually made this candle herself, and it has like the smell and the scent of the desert. And so when she started creating it, it just didn't feel right. So then that's when she created it to look like the Arabian, like ancient Arabia. And this was the first time I had ever seen a niqabi as an author, someone who covers her face. And whilst that's not a religious thing, that's more of a cultural choice, then there are Muslim women who do it. First time I've ever seen a niqabi author ever. And then I read the book, and female protagonist, strong protagonist as well. I was like, wow. It took me away. And the sequel, We Free the Stars, comes out relatively soon, but not soon enough. So if you haven't read it, please read this. The first part of the book, the first quarter is, world building and, getting to know it. So it's a steady pace. But then once you get past that, it's like bang, bang, bang all the way to the end. So it's fantastic. So those are my recommendations. Were there anything else that you guys wanted to recommend that we missed? TV, movies?
I think, Ali, you would agree with me on this if we recommend the Avatar The Last Airbender for those people who have not watched it yet. Please go watch it. Like, it is such a good children's show, and it's a good show in general, but it has all this diversity. It's very fantastical, and I do recommend the comics that came after it.
Oh, yeah, the comics are so good.
If you want more Avatar, but not like Legend of Korra, which I think is the sequel series, the comics are fantastic. I just recently got The Search Omnibus, so that's my plan after this, is to read The Search, because we want to know what happens to Zuko's mum. I
I actually read The Search. It's really good. You're gonna love it.
Oh, okay. So that's two people we won't be talking to for the next couple of days. Okay.
I mean, I've already watched and read everything, so I'm fine.
Oh, good
I
on
did
you.
like to ask Tobias though, with your book, is it a contemporary or is it like a fantasy sort of story? Because when Annie was talking about the world building, I know with mine, I didn't envision a Eurocentric world. I envisioned one of like magical forests or magical deserts and like this. So I was just wondering, as like a fellow writer, what your process was if it was a fantasy world.
Mine's contemporary, so I didn't have to encounter any of that. But it's set in the town where I grew up, in country Victoria. So it's a place I know very well, and it's changed a lot since I lived there. But yeah, so I didn't have to work too hard to create that world.
Oh, I'm so excited for your book to come out, Tobias, which comes out. Sorry, what month next year was that?
August next year.
I
August
am
next
so
year.
excited. I'm gonna be there at Kinokuniya with like 10
Yes.
copies of the book. Sign it.
I called dibs on emceeing your book launch. Hopefully by then the restrictions for COVID have lifted and we can have an in-person.
Let's hope.
I mean, I will get down there as fast as I can possibly carry myself and my giant book stack, but I will be there with bells on if you need me to be there.
Yes. Well, hopefully
Thanks,
we can
guys.
do something like this to celebrate the release of Tobias's book. So, look, sadly, this has to come to an end. I'd love to have a chat to you all day about things like this and recommendations. But first of all, I just want to thank Ali Gill, Maisie Dixon, and Tobias Madden. Thank you so much for being here and being on this Diversity in Infinite Worlds panel. Once again, Tobias has a book coming out next year, so keep an eye out on that. But in the meantime, you can find Underdog and read that. That's fantastic. Maisie has a virtual booth happening with Inconceivable. She's got fantastic candles that are on display. That's Candlesmith Co. So definitely look out for this. And I mentioned yesterday, actually, when I opened this, I nearly licked it because it smells like vanilla caramel. Just FYI,
Yes.
don't lick the candle.
My candles are based off my favorite books. So the one that Annie's holding right now is based off a city where it's called Carver City, which is from the Wicked Villain series by Katie Robert. And Hag's Kitchen is based off one of my favorite characters in Cresley Cole's The Immortals After Dark series.
Yeah, I didn't lick this one. It was this one. And last but not least, Ali also has a virtual booth happening with Inconceivable, and she's got Simply Ali T, her store, selling stickers and fantastic enamel pins. This is one of them, and this was inspired by Sarah J. Maas's new book. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yes.
That is gorgeous, Ali. That is beautiful.
Thank you. I worked so hard.
Yeah, this one is in Crescent City. Yeah, fantastic. Which is a Bloomsbury title. Yes, Tobias?
That was a great book. That was a great book. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that very much.
I need to catch up on that
like,
one.
Even though it was written by a white woman, there's like subtle diversities in there because like some of the best friends are lesbians, and and it's like that subtle thing that we exist. You don't have to be the main character of your book, but like make sure that we exist.
It's just subtle nods to people who are different. Like it's just seeing yourself, even if it's a side character or like a one-off scene, just acknowledging that we exist is great in itself.
Yes, yes, 100%. When there's that, inclusion, I think inclusivity is pretty much the message that we've got, that it's real, like what Tobias said at the beginning of the panel. It's the reality. It's drawing that parallel to the reality in a fantasy book or in a contemporary fiction book and things like that. It is drawing that reality and recognizing that whilst we are different, we are all people. We live and coexist in the same world. And I think it's a beautiful thing. Diversity and representation and inclusivity is a beautiful thing. And, it sort of, stems from my favorite artist, Michael Jackson's words that it don't matter if you're black or white, which means it doesn't matter who you are. You're a person, you have feelings, and you coexist in the real world with us. And I think having us all together celebrating that difference, but, also celebrating the bond that we all have, which is, the pop culture or the books or the film, it's a wonderful thing. I think we need to see more of that in our world. I think so. So once again, I want to thank the three of you for joining me on this panel today. It has been a pleasure to talk to you about diversity and in pop culture, books and film. And I also wanted to thank the Lord of Inconceivable, Meg's Drinkwater, for having us. Thank you, Megs, and for organising Inconceivable. So please check out the rest of the panels. Please check out the rest of the virtual booths and have a great time at the virtual con. Thanks, everyone.
Inconceivable!